So if you put on speaker view, and I will shortly introduce our panelists. Before that, let me introduce myself. I'm Maria, I'm from Romania. I'm on the Alumni Network Coordination Group together with Sol. And I had the luck of being in EYP for 15 years. I started in 2004.
Only mute.
And wrapped it up last year. Our first panelist, we're honored and super excited to have the co-founder of EYP with us, Miss Bettina Carr-Allinson. Welcome and thank you again, Bettina, for joining us. We also have Philip Scharf with us, who was Executive Director of EYP from 2004 to 2006. And today, Philip is a partner at an international organizational consultancy, coaching individual teams and organizations on topics such as leadership. Our third panelist is Anya Suprunenko. Anya has a master's in public policy, and she was involved with EYP as a volunteer for quite some time. She was president of her national committee in Ukraine. She was a member of the governing body, so the international board of EYP, and she is now the incoming executive director at the EYP office. I'll tell you briefly about the format of the panel. We're first going to have our three speakers. They're going to share with us a bit of insight about how they experienced EYP, how it was during their time. After that, we will have a few follow-up questions, perhaps from my side, but we want the focus to be on opening up questions to you. From now on, whenever you want, you can write your question in the chat. You can open it in a separate panel from the lower bar. You can write your chat there, and we also ask that you raise your hand. You have the option it should appear in your panel, raise your hand, and that will enable us to call on you to ask your question later on. To start off, Bettina, would you like to tell us a bit about how it all started?
Yes, certainly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Well, it's really, amazing that 34 years ago, I was sitting at around this time in the afternoon with a group of friends and a glass of wine, and we all said, we actually need a new challenge, we need new ideas, and let's do something. And the first one who comes up with a good idea, we will support. And so we all went back to our own homes and started thinking. And because I was working in the international school in Fontainebleau, I could see the benefit of so many different nationalities meeting each other. And I thought I would sort of write up a project that would include all these different nationalities. And I would start with the European countries, part of the then EEC. So I wrote a project, and I thought, well, the main item on the project must be democracy, because that's part of our Western civilization. And at the time, we still had the Berlin Wall dividing Germany. And, there were many non-free countries. So the purpose of the project should be to involve and to empower young together with the participants. So, I went back home and sat down and, started writing, and then came up with a youth parliament. There weren't any youth parliaments at the time. There are lots of them now, but it was a new thing. And then I thought, well, 12 countries, they're all speaking different languages. How do I get these people to communicate with each other? Because I can't possibly ask them to speak their own language. So we have to put something into place whereby they can communicate despite the different languages. And that's where I came up with the team building. I mean, no companies were doing team building in those days. They're all doing it now. I wish I could charge them for every time. That would be good. But anyway, so I got hold of the Outward Bound organization, and after first saying, no, you're an idiot, this will never work, they said, okay, it's in our manifesto, no challenge too big for us, so we'll take it on. And then the hard work started with my 4 friends. We wrote to many schools and put forward a project, which at the time was a full week with 1.5 day team building, then committee work, and then the famous GA. And in the meantime, there would be the journalists working away to criticize what everybody had put in the committee, or to say how fantastic it was, or what a good resolution, wonderful. And at the same time, we had the Euro Village to show all the different foods and other products of the different countries. And the funny thing was that the Greeks always borrowed from the Turkish delegation and vice versa, because they all had the very same foods anyway. So, and it was an eye-opening to many of them, because I hadn't realized that. It was really good fun. And then there was the evening get-togethers where the journalists would be working, the chairs would be working, and the musicians would be working, or the dancers, or whatever they were going to do at the Euro concert. And at the very first session, we had somebody play Imagine, and that took off as the EYP song that first year in 1988. But it was hard work, because we didn't have internet, we didn't have computers, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have social media. We just had to write everything on a piece of paper, type it up, photocopy it, and send it. And the cost of doing that was quite tremendous, because we made thousands of photocopies, cost lots of stamps, and of course, I had to make a budget which would include the team builder salaries, all the postage, the photocopies, and you name it. It was a big budget. So I had 6 months to go and fundraise for the first session, and to go to the European Parliament to ask, can I please use the name European Youth Parliament? And that was an amazing experience. So sitting in the enormous office with the president, Pierre Fimelin, was saying, what have you come to see me about, Mrs. Carlinson? So I told him. He didn't say a word for about an hour. He let me speak, and I was getting very nervous because he didn't comment at all. And in the end he said, I'm jealous. I said, why? Why? Possibly, how can you be jealous? He said, well, I wish I would have thought of that myself. That would have been, we would have kept it within the European institutions. I said, well, it's just as well that it's not, because we can do whatever we like without having to always go back to the institutions. So, and then, of course, I made a proposal to the European Commission to fund it. And then there were elections, and then I got a letter from the new president who said, no way you can go ahead. And I'd done all this work, and I didn't know what to do. In youth parliament was just being, got a negative answer. And so I had to go and talk to him, and we became very good friends. And in the end, I could go ahead. So you see, there were a few obstacles on the way. But then in 1988, we had I wrote to 12 countries, different schools, and the first school replied, could come, because I didn't have a system, nothing. So, and that was an amazing time, because, I've still got film of the first EYP session, but it's on a very old video. I don't know if anyone can make it into a modern version maybe one day. So it was great. And then we started, immediately teachers starting to talk about, could we have one in our country, et cetera, and we moved on from there. But, it was, of course, it was a tryout. It could have been a total disaster, but it was a great success. So yeah, there we are, 34 years on. My goodness.
It's amazing to hear it. And what I find very interesting is that while things might have changed in some of the methods we use and maybe going digital, but we still have the same program element. So the core program, the core concept, it's the same, and it's still about bringing people together from different countries.
Yeah, that's great to see. And thank you so for your fantastic introduction. Very emotional too, you know, nearly made me cry. My goodness. Naughty man.
So Philip, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
How was EYP in your time?
Well, I got to know EYP only at the national level first. I was active in Germany at the national level, for example, with Jochen, who is here, and Jörg. I saw them from back then. And I mean, it was like I guess it was like today with everything that Bettina just told us, more or less. And back then, I started in '96, and I was active, as I said, on the national level. I was president of EYP Germany then, and the international organization had grown. Bettina, you said you started with 12 countries, right?
Well, we had 15 countries at the time, and I can't remember exactly how many national committees, but there were quite a few of them.
Yeah. And then in 2004, I think we were at, maybe Alan knows, but I think we were at like 28 or 30, around that size. And the challenge that was there was how could the new governance structure for EYP look like then. So that was an exciting time, because it was clear, okay, the old governing structure wouldn't continue the way it was. We had to find a new structure, and there was a time in between, and that was the time of the Berlin group. It was called. It was a group. Shamal is here, for example, from the group, and JP was in that group as well. It was a group of alumni who would come together in Berlin and at the Schwarzkopf Foundation and think of how could we set up a new governance structure for EYP. I really enjoyed that time and that thinking about how should this organization be governed. And we came up with a first draft that was consulted with all the national committees. So it was the first draft, and then eventually the final draft and then the EYP Charter. And that EYP Charter was signed in 2004 at the Berlin International Session. I still have the ink that we used to sign that paper back then by all the national committees. Yeah, so back then the BNC already existed. That was existent before, but we introduced, for example, the GB that is still existing now. These kind of things.
Thank you, Philip. So Anya, what has happened in the last 10 years, the main developments or changes?
Hi, everyone. I think I pick up where Philip left because the EYP basically continued to broaden its horizons, and not just geographically, because we are now actually at the 40 countries in Europe, and I think we now have a more established practice how to reach out to the countries which we are not in, so it doesn't come randomly, and we really try to cover the entire country of Europe scope. And of course, it also became more accessible. So we diversified in the schools we involved. It's more schools, it's different schools. It's also not just capital cities as it was before. So we really became larger in what kind of people we reach, young people. It also became more and more youth-driven. So in the last 10 years, it really transformed into a completely youth-driven organization, which also then very much pushed us into developing even more governance structures and more policies, because we work a lot with young with schools, and we could not anymore rely just on the schools rules, which of course they also need, but we had to set up, for example, a welfare framework or a safe person framework that was introduced before. And of course, it also became more professional. We have an office in Berlin with 8 people now. I know that when Philip started, he was the only one for 2 years. Then when Jan Philip continued, he has 1 more intern, so they were 2 for 3 years, and now we're a team of 8 people. And it's also a wonderful international team. From next week onwards, we will not have a single German in the team. It's not necessarily great, of course, but it transformed massively also because we became such a large organization, and it now offers a full journey to all the participants. So it's not just about being a delegate, then a media team person and a chairperson. It's also a lot of trainings, a lot of opportunities beyond just being at the session.
Thank you, Anya. So I have a question to all 3 of you to see a bit EYP then and now. The first one is about international sessions. How did you decide on a city? How did it end up taking place in one country or another? How did you get organizers? If you can tell us a bit about that process.
Who shall start?
Maybe we take it historically.
What?
If you can start, Bettina.
What? Is this a question for me?
Yes.
Yes. Can you repeat the question? Because
Right.
I was reading on my screen a question from somebody else. So.
How did you decide on an international session, whether it would take place in one country or another? How did you get the team of organizers there?
Well, the sessions, the international ones, in the first, say, 10 years, it was countries who would say, we would like to host one. And not many countries did, that's why we had 3 sessions in Fontainebleau, where we started EYP. And then the first one was outside of Fontainebleau, was in Portugal, another one in Thessaloniki, and so forth, We started out with people who knew nothing about EYP, obviously. And so we didn't have any chairpersons in the first year or so. We had to train the chairs. So there was a special program of chair training the following year, for the new sessions. And then it was up to the chairs and the journos to, recommend people from within their own group and say, well, so, Tina or Alma or Peter would really like to be a journalist or would like to be a chair and so on. So it went on a recommendation system. And the organizers were mainly people from the country, students from the country where the session was taking place. And also a few in what were in the beginning called international organizers, because there were so many EYPers who wanted to come back in one role or another, and they kept sort of phoning up saying, what can I do? Can I help? Can I come? So that's how it worked.
And about how many participants did you have in the average international session?
Well, in the first one, we had 144, 12 from each of the 12 EC countries. And the next one, we had about 200. And in Strasbourg, that was a summer session in 95, I think it was, we had 500 EYPers there.
That's impressive.
I think that was one of the largest sessions.
I think so, actually, definitely.
Yeah.
Did the process change in any way, Philip?
What we established back then in the GB time, etc., was an application procedure. I don't know if you still do that, but the national committees applied for the international sessions, and there were some criteria. You had to file, I don't know, your financial plan and all your whole idea, the purpose that you wanted to bring across with the session, and then the GB would decide on the sessions. That's pretty much how it was established back then. Do you still do it this way?
Yeah, it's the same, and it's now more and more competitive. So it's a lot of a prestige, and I think for you it was still too convinced the national committees that you should do it. And now I think the national committees compete for that. And in fact, we will be entering the phase of 100th international session in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And for this session, we really want to launch their competition, and it will be their honor for the national committee to get it.
And I think it's going to be quite an intense competition, because I've heard already 2 years ago NC's planning, saying they're not applying now because they're waiting for the 100. And what about establishing new networks? So now we have, I think it's 40 countries that we have a national chapter. How did you get the contacts to establish the basis, Bettina, to create the national chapters? If there was a formal structure for it, I'm sorry.
Well, there was a formal structure, yes. We asked those schools or teachers or individuals who wanted to carry on with the EYP and wanted to set up a national structure, which was the idea to have not only international meetings, but national meetings and local and regional meetings, to be able to select the students who could represent the country and be more in touch with the whole of the country rather than just 1 or 2 schools. So the only people I had in the beginning to work with were the actual teachers who came with the delegations, and many of them set up a national committee and then created some kind of legal structure. Like in France, it was an association, and they could have a bank account and they could start organizing local events and culminating in a national election. So that was how it started working. And then towards 2000, 1999, 2000, there were lots of young EYPers who said, well, actually, I think we should be managing this whole project, and I said, yes, fine, we'll talk about that. But there was a lot of opposition from the adults at the time. So, it was over to the Schwarzkopf Foundation to find a solution for that problem.
Yeah, that was actually something back then. The teachers we had teacher-driven national committees and youth-driven national committees. We actually, in the beginning, we had teacher seats in the GB. I guess you don't have that anymore, Anya, or is that still?
Well, it actually changed only last November.
Okay. Over my time between 2004 and 2008, that already changed a lot. It always moved more into the direction of youth network, youth organization driven national committees. And actually, how we established new national committees was completely random. People from a new country would write an email to the international office and okay, we would like to, and then someone close would get in touch with them. We tried to invite a delegation to international sessions so that they could see it and they could establish context. And then over time, there were people in the GB and also in the BNC who started to, we should do this in a more proper way, and we should have outreach programs, etc., like today. But in the beginning, it was very, very random, those new countries. And so, often, so there would be people from the new country saying, oh, we heard about you, we want to be part of you. Or there would be people who would have contacts in other countries and say, okay, I want to go there and I want to help build up the EYP in Hungary, for example.
I think part of that is still the case now. One of our youngest national committees in Denmark was started by a Norwegian alumnus that moved to Denmark to study. And he started EYP Denmark. Anya, do you have anything to add on the more recent policies or systems?
Actually, I don't know if we have Zara here now from the Netherlands, because I remember that she was still in charge of drafting this policy of the regional committees and how the committees can join.
Yeah, no, I think, hey everyone. Well, I think this was already there, but it was the first time when I was still in EYP, it was the first time we had a regional development committee. No, it was not the name, something like that. And that was the first time we were actually thinking about, well, actually what you said right before really well, of sort of diversifying outside of diversity of countries, which of course was a great step before, but I felt at the time that I was active, that was not really enough. And we were indeed talking about also diversifying in terms of cities or regions, or also still, of course, some NCs.
Yeah, and I think also, of course, what then we put in place, it's now 3 phases for what the national committee goes through. So it's not just like, hey, we want to be national committee, here you are, but you have to be like an initiative, then a candidate NC, and then you're entering in the full.
Trying to make sure it's a stable structure in place. But we also have here, if I'm not mistaken, the Natalia, the founder of EYP Belarus. Could you tell us how it was to start EYP for you?
You're muted, Natalia.
Right.
Maybe try unmute one more time.
Sure.
Yes, now.
Yeah, it works. Great. Hello, everyone. I was sitting relaxed thinking, what kind of Natalia is that? Is that me?
Well, sorry to put you on the spot.
Of course, I didn't remember me being the one who started at all, because I remember I was just a student in second year and I was studying in a regional university, not in the capital. And I think there had already been some sessions of EYP in Belarus by the time I joined. But that was the time when Dr. Flowers, and he's over here as well, hello, Ellen Flowers, who came over with some alumni from other countries. I remember there was Shamal, hello Shamal. There were some other people, 3 or 4 more people, and they had a kind of trip around the country, gathering students from different regional centers. And that was massive, that was very dynamic. Lots of people joined in and we got our first session. And then, well, this is how it all started. And the whole fun happened a bit later in 2000, I guess, when was it, 2004 or 5, when Dr. Flowers was expelled from the country by KGB. And we were officially informed and warned of all this espionage theory of EYP being this agent in the country. And then for some time, for some years, the organization didn't work inside Belarus because it was banned. And as far as I know, because I was already too old and I didn't participate, but guys would go out of the country and have sessions around the country for a few years. And recently I learned about the well-developed structure of EYP now in Minsk, in Belarus. And I was amazed. I went over in November. It was last November, not this one, 2018. And that was fantastic. I saw so many new faces. They're so dynamic, energetic, and they're running the organization so nicely right now. I don't know if there is someone from EYP Belarus now here. I don't see the familiar faces.
We might see it in the chat in a bit.
Oh, right. But that was so strange to be addressing people. They asked to address me on behalf of the old EYPers. That was in November 2 years ago. And I was speaking about my first session, my first experience being 17 years ago. And I was looking at people and participants were younger than 17. It was horrible. Your time flies. This is how you realize that time flies.
Thank you very much, Natalia. So we have one question from Maria Bianca, if you want to ask it.
Yeah, sure. Let me just scroll back to see what I actually asked. But I know it was to Bettina.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so it's great to see and to hear the story about how EYP was first founded and all the great things that you founded. But I was wondering, what has EYP brought to you throughout all these years? Because we know you brought EYP to us, but what has the organization maybe in turn brought to you?
Well, it's fantastic to see how EYP has developed over the past 10, 15 years, and that so many young people are now involved in it, and that they've taken the reign of the organization rather than leaving it to a group of adults, because the EYP was always meant to be the European Youth Parliament and not the European Adult Parliament. So it's much better now, and I'm just very, very happy and, you know, lucky in a way that things have gone so well, and that I can see so many people participating every year and going on to having a wonderful experience, more self-confidence probably, and that we could include early on, back to the 1990s already, the countries that were at the time still locked away.
Thank you, Bettina. So we heard a bit about your motivation to start, Bettina. Could I ask Philip and Anya as well, what your motivation for UIP and perhaps what your vision for UIP was or is for Anya? Whichever one of you wants to start.
Oh, Anya, you start. That's a difficult question.
Oh yeah, Philip, I was counting on you to set the tone. I think that EYP, of course, also coming, like also experiences this accessibility development and how it also enabled me to explore Europe. I think we should go in the direction to allow even more young Europeans to be part of EYP. And for that, of course, we also just need to experiment and develop the formats, new formats and ideas. And I think this Corona crisis already pushed us into this direction. With the digital formats, we see that that it gives us more connectivity and it can enable us to reach out even to more young people. So we have to move into this direction. And of course, EYP, for being such a large network, we are still not well known enough. And of course, it's maybe rather means to how also achieve some of the things, but we have to become a more prominent player in the field. And for that, I think also not without alumni's help, like seeing that potential is a network of more than thousands, EYPers all across the globe, we have to enable all of this so that the impact we create can be even more lasting. Philip, now your turn.
Yeah. Repeat the question again, Maria, please. Was it why what I liked about EYP?
Your why. Why did you get involved? Your motivation for it, and if you remember, what your vision for it? What did you hope it would become?
Yeah. I guess I got involved. I got involved just because my older sister somehow got involved, and this is how I stumbled into it. And then I stayed because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed meeting these people, first from all over Germany and then from all over Europe. It was more the enjoyment and fun part, actually. And then what struck me and what I always liked, and this is more of a why that continues through my life as well, is that this experience of people meeting each other and getting in dialogue and contact that wouldn't have met otherwise, which is to be a platform that enables this kind of dialogue, is something that I've always that I find very precious. And a bit later, I don't know exactly when we did it, but we did a Euro-Mediterranean Youth Parliament with so EYP countries plus the whole southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Morocco, etc. That was great. That was great, and it enlarged this idea of intercultural dialogue even a step further.
Thank you very much. And we also had, I think, EYP Friends organized in around 2010 a forum with where we had US and Canadian participants, if I'm not mistaken. So there were a few projects in this direction. We also had a question from Alan Flowers, who's I think credited for having supported quite a few UNC's startup. Alan, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. A question to Bettina, going back to see if I can stretch her memory to 1992 now. There was actually a very famous Edinburgh artist called Ricky DeMarco that I know is a very good friend of Bettina, who worked alongside Bettina on creativity aspects of EYP back in the early 90s, and in fact was the person who facilitated in 1998 the famous Edinburgh Festival session we might hear about. Maybe Sol remembers. That's from his time, and a few other older EYPers here. And by the way, it was that session that introduced Belarus to EYP. I was asked to find 2 music performers there. But regards to the Strasbourg session, my recollection, Bettina will maybe correct me, was that was around 1992, and that was just as Europe had opened. So my question was, how did the vision for EYP perhaps change and develop at that time? What was your vision? Can you put your mind back to what you were thinking as suddenly the geographical map of Europe from the perspective of Western Europe, suddenly it opened up? Bettina.
Yes. Okay. No, certainly I do remember all aspects of that amazing session. And I was talking to Ricky DeMarco well before we organized the event. And because of the Berlin Wall coming down, because of opening up to countries in Eastern Europe where he had lots of contacts, we both felt that there should be another element to the EYP session, which would be art, so that students from these countries who would not maybe be as vocal and would know how to act in a debate very well could express themselves through another medium. And so we organized these art committees where students from the Czech Republic, from Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Croatia, and Georgia, you name it, we had all the, we had all these countries there, plus a few others. And they had observer status because there was no structure in these countries yet to bring them in as full members of the EYP. But it was an amazing exhibition because it was easier for those young people to put their view on either on paper or build a structure or do a sculpture or whatever. It was fantastic. I don't know if that ever happened again, but I would recommend it.
Can I come up with a comment? Well, what about the 1998? That was another amazing summer cultural event, and the witness, the history shows it, Bettina, an absolutely brilliant and inspiring idea, because in Belarus, where the politics was, to say the least, very uncertain, you're absolutely right. By using the medium of art and creativity, we got our first 2 Belarusians in 1998 out of the country to an event. I can still remember it to this day, not being sure if there wasn't going to be an issue with a thing called European Youth Parliament, but a real winner, and I'm glad we could bring that aspect out, which still possibly even at this time has room for development.
Definitely.
Yes.
Thank
Maybe
you
some
very
others
much,
here
Alan.
remember 1998.
We have another question now from Kirsten Eckhart.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I think part of it was already answered now with, of course, very significant, the fall of the wall. And I don't know if you have any other memories of the other countries. I mean, Germany is, of course, a very prominent example. If then new committees joined, like NCs in other countries that were affected by the wall.
Could you maybe repeat your question in case people didn't see it on the...
Sorry, yes.
No.
I was wondering about significant effect of political developments on EYP, be both on the organizational level of EYP in general or NCs. Sometimes there are kind of stories on you know, especially now talking about Hungary, or also from my own experience as a past project manager in the EYP office, that Hungary had not the nicest development in terms of EYP because of also government restrictions. I don't know if you have positive or negative memories of political developments that affected EYP.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Well, that's an interesting question, but because we were focusing on the 16 to 18-year-olds, we didn't have any particular political problems. The only one we ever had was in a session in Barcelona and Catalonia, where the local government wanted the EYP to pass a resolution to separate Catalonia from Spain. So, and that was a very difficult time because they had got all the big guns out for us, and we were just a group of young people. And it was a big fight to get them to calm down and not interfere in EYP, which had nothing to do with local politics. But we had delegations from, as soon as the wall came down, which was during the EYP session in Thessaloniki in '89, we immediately invited a combined delegation from Germany, from Eastern Germany and Western Germany, for the next session. And we got people out, and Ricky DeMarco helped us find a contact in former Eastern Germany, but because you know the whole process was taking place at the time for the unification, and so we had combined delegations as from '89 in the EYP to bring the Germans together again, which was great.
Thank you. I remember actually a while ago we on Twitter, when there was the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, we had a few alumni post about how they were at the session and how it was announced, I think, during GA that the wall had fallen. And on this, maybe Philip, how was it? Because you were involved in when the Kiev IS was organized. How was it to organize an IS in post the first IS in a post USSR country?
Honestly, it's so long time ago, but I don't remember a big difference to the other international sessions. I mean, for me, it was the first time going to Kiev, which I enjoyed a lot, and it was very exciting for me. And it was I enjoyed working with the Kiev National Committee back then, and seeing the city and all that. But apart from that, it felt like an international session, like all the others.
And were there any political events that either positively or negatively impacted the work?
I try to think about it. Maybe the others can help. I don't remember during that time.
What about you, Anya? Any in the recent events?
I think like if what probably Kirsten was referring to, of course, we're now in the countries where democracy is at stake, and we also have the panel on this topic tomorrow. Of course, it's more and more challenging also for us to support those national committees. So like we had an experience with Turkey being forced to cancel the event. In Ukraine, of course, we had a revolution, and also the international session was canceled due to the unfortunate event. So this is still being affected, and there we see the importance of our work, and of course, especially with these regions, but not only, we have to continue supporting and enabling young people, but also actually on this Berlin Wall memory. I don't know if John is here from Ireland, I think, who was a participant at the very first international session. And I think you were at the session in Thessaloniki, right? When the news came through, and then the John, I don't know if you're here. At
John
least,
Norton.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking forward to seeing him actually. But
he was here for sure in the beginning, but because I was also messaging with him, but okay, he is not here, but when he's back, maybe he can also share with us a couple of memories, because he was part of this Thessaloniki International.
I think maybe, John, are you here now? I just unmuted him.
No.
Maybe not. We probably picked the exact minute. He was
yeah, he just actually sent me a message, but but I think these are events, and of course also I remember in terms of political things, I remember also the international session in Rennes in 2000, when was it, 16, when they were also, at the moment of the session, there was a Turkish coup taking place and the Nice terror attack. And that was, of course, also very massive and also a very different challenges for us as an organization to see how to react to it. And for the French National Committee, it was a very difficult time.
We've also had, I was a member of the governing body in the last 2 years, and we had a few discussions between national committees from countries that were at dispute, political dispute, and that was intensifying. So it's definitely very interesting to be in the position to also assist so that both parties communicate calmly, and that the role that the youth can have in their country to make sure that regardless of the political position of their governments, the events can go on as normal as possible. We had another question from Mila, if you still want to ask it.
Sure. I think I want to get back to the idea of diversity in EYP, and it's been such a foundational component in everything we do. And it was great to hear that there are so many efforts to involve more national committees, to go more regional. And I wonder, and I think my question primarily goes to Anya, what is being done now to diversify EYP even further, to diversify the participant crowd, and Anya also touched on the EYP leadership as well, so it would be great to hear about that.
Thank you, Mila. I think the steps that we are taking are still very small steps, but they're happening, and it's really a way to go for us to become a truly diverse in our nature. But I think 3 highlights that I want to mention is that now it's very, very rare that the participants pay for their travel expenses, or at least every second participant is being reimbursed. And every session has this fund, like travel fund, and we are trying to actively fundraise for it. It's a financial matter, how to enable more and more young people to come. So we also have an outreach strategy in place. It will be reevaluated this year. It was set up 5 years ago, and we outlined the groups we want to reach out. We analyzed whom we don't reach out at all to. Of course, we have certain limitations by being an English-speaking organization, so that doesn't enable us to reach to all the young people, but this is also being discussed, at least on the national levels, if we should also move to the national languages, at least at the level of some regional events. And of course, the selection processes, they have changed drastically. It's not anymore, at least not for every national committee, that's just the delegations per school. There are a lot of calls for applicants, so it's a very...
Just open the door.
And then there is also, some of you might remember the recommendation system which was in place, which enabled chairpersons and media team members to apply to become an official at the session. It's not the case anymore. I mean, we still have a selection process in place, but it's not recommendations. It's not as exclusive as it used to be. So now if you're a good applicant, you don't have to be recommended. You just apply and you're selected, and you get the learning experience you want to get. But Mila, also please always let us know if you have any ideas on this field, because we are still also trying to explore the diversity.
Thank you very much.
Anya, just a quick follow-up. Was it mistaken, or was there some effort to involve refugees in EYP activities? I think I've seen something about that.
Oh, thank you. That's one of the most wonderful examples that we have, and I forgot to mention it. We now actively, like for 3 years, we are now partnering with the UNHCR, that's the UN Agency for the Refugees. And every international session has a delegation of refugees. It's a small delegation, but we are trying to increase it. Of course, it's a challenge because the onboarding process for them is much more longer than otherwise. But yeah, that's a cooperation which is taking place.
Thank you very much, Mila and Anya. We have perhaps a final question from the audience from Vasil to all panelists.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here in this wonderful crowd of very inspiring people. And as we took the turn to politics, I would like to ask our top speakers, both Bettina, Philippe, and Anya, the question on public policy. I'm not sure, but maybe there were some hint from the founders that at some point EYP will not only be as only the thing of youth empowerment, debates, etc., but it will somehow influence and make impact on public policy of the European Parliament, EU structures, or even in particular European countries. I remember from that time, so my last EYP activity was 2016, so 4 years ago. But I remember that at least after the international sessions, the resolutions were sent to European Parliament, maybe from some national sessions of national committees. Like Ukrainian example was very prominent 2013, Euromaidan, the Revolution of Dignity, and I have seen a lot of EYPers protesting peacefully on the streets. And it make, for example, in our case, 17 years from founding EYP to making the goal of EU membership in Ukrainian constitution, the lawmakers. I can't say that it's a direct impact, right? But it's some kind of also the general impact on the whole process.
So in a nutshell, it's the impact that EYP has made on public policies of the EU or particular countries.
And maybe
it goes to all the panelists, yes?
Yeah, and maybe is there any, to Anya in particular, is there any monitoring mechanism in place for this to monitor if we impact as EYP community?
Thank you very much, Vasil. So impact that EYP has had, and maybe we give it a wider spin on public policy, but perhaps if you think what is the impact that EYP has on youth or Europe, or what are your thoughts on EYP impact, Bettina? You are muted, I think, Bettina.
Okay. No, it was always the intention that the resolution should be given to the members of the European Parliament. And the first 2 years, I fundraised enough to take a delegation of the then whatever EYP session to Strasbourg with the resolutions to discuss them with the members of Parliament, which meant that they couldn't just put them in the bin or say, well, I will answer you in 2 months' time or whatever. But unfortunately, I ran out of money to do that sort of thing. But it's up to you to make sure that your resolutions get a hearing from, first of all, your own members of the European Parliament in the countries where you have MEPs, and to then work together with them to put pressure on others. You know, but that's up to you.
I guess my take on it is that I guess the discussion is if EYP is an educational project or a political player project is as old as EYP, and there have always been those different groups within EYP. My answer has always been it's the educational project. So the impact on youth is how I would, this is where I would measure, and this is the stories I would tell. And this, what Saul very emotionally showed in the beginning, is exactly this kind of story, how people have grown as individuals and as active citizens and have thereby then influenced their communities, their countries in many, many ways. Others then through resolution booklets. I don't know an example where a resolution has actually impacted politics. I remember copying the resolution booklets from the international sessions by hand in the international office and then putting them into envelopes and sending them to the European Parliament. with no effect whatsoever. We did what we once did was a think tank with alumni, where we got the answer, the question to think about a topic from a commissioner and then do the think tank, and her people were there, etc. But even that didn't really have an impact. So yeah, that would be my.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
No, it's this was always a big question, you know, educational project, and it was fine whilst we had students from say 15 to 17 who were still at school. Now, as soon as you get students who are older and at university, then you are not a representative because you haven't been elected. And this, you know, there are youth parliaments all over Europe now, and you have to be elected to become a member. So if you want to make political pressure, you have to go through that way and use that vehicle to have your voice heard. I don't think you can use an educational project for that.
Yeah, if I can just continue, I think it's also what Philip mentioned about educational versus political. It's an ongoing discussion until now. And of course, it's a big question. If it's an educational program on political things, how political can we be? Can you educate politically and not be political yourself? And the challenge that we face is, of course, that we are in 40 countries, and what's accepted in some countries, it's not there. As an organization, it's very difficult to make stances. But I think we slowly have started moving in the direction where we are not afraid to make statements. You could check our social media. We made a statement about the anti-discrimination and racism movement in the US now, which was the very first statement we've ever made, which took many hours to come up with this couple of sentences. But I think it's also, of course, yeah, that is what's happening now. And I think that's also what the reality is, that if you have a political education as a platform, you also have to take the courage. But also, I think in the end, we want to be a voice of young people. So I think with Philip, like it's still the case that we are not an advocacy organization. We don't aim to participate in the youth policy making. That's not our aim. That's not who we are. It's not our DNA. But of course, we do want to be a voice of young people. And that we do want to further continue letting the decision makers know what do young people know on the important issues that are happening in the world in Europe.
If I can follow up on this, and we actually want to ask the panelists, but we'll also post the question as a poll on Zoom. What direction do you think EYP could take in the next 30 years? Do you think continue as is, which is how it's been since the beginning? Do you think it should take a more active role in policy making, or expand beyond the Council of Europe countries, which we have now? Or if you have any other ideas, of course, let us know. So to any and all of the panelists that might want to answer.
So we shall answer like in the poll, or
no? So if you can share with us your thoughts, and in the meantime we see the answers in the chat from the attendees.
Okay, I can start. I think I'm getting afraid when I see in the bigger political situation the rise of nationalism in Europe. And I think with exactly what I said before, getting people to talk to each other that wouldn't talk to each other otherwise, getting an understanding for other countries and for the worth of cooperation rather than nationalism is such an added value that EYP can give to this world, that this would be where I would want EYP to continue working and to even reach out to more young people. So yeah, that would be my vision.
Thank you, Philip. What about you, Bettina? What do you think?
Well, I did the first 34 years. I think you have to be extremely careful, but there are ways and means of doing this. You just have to think about what would be possible. For instance, there could be some kind of liaison with a group of MEPs, including the Youth and Culture Committee, who would meet once a year with a group of EYPers. It would not be political then. And you would have to make sure that you would say we are a non-political organization, but we have X number of members, and we therefore have a voice in Europe. And say we would like to translate that into a conversation with members of, you name the different committees, and that a group of you goes to Strasbourg or to Brussels and talks to these people and then report back to the rest of EYP. That could be a solution, but I'm sure you've got enough brains on EYP to come up with the right one.
What are your thoughts, Anya?
I much agree with what was said, and also that we have to be careful because of the geographical scopes that we cover. I also think that since our mission is to empower young active citizens, we should also be able to empower them by being role models. So we should, of course, be not afraid, but our added value is not being political advocates, and we are not a lobby organization. So we should remember about the methodology and educational values that we have. The methodology that Bettina, you came up with, is working until now. We didn't alter a single element of these 4 key pillars that every session has, and that's also what I see the comments in the chat. I think we just have to value this methodology and maybe to indeed see how we can expand it so that actually every single young person has a chance to go through it, and by that to understand that we are strong in diversity, for united in diversity.
Thank you very much for that. I remember one of my favorite recent media projects. We now call them media teams rather than press teams as in the early years. At an international session, they did interviews in parallel with young people in the same committee from countries who had been at war or who were not in good political relations. And it was really inspiring to hear from them how they learned that they can get along and they can discuss some of the issues that at home are presented so differently. So it's really impressive to see in practice. The final question now, perhaps. So we talked a bit about EYP. We learned how it developed. We learned how EYP can grow and what it could direction it could go into. What about the alumni network? So there were several attempts to bring together all the alumni of EYP, and while, as Sol mentioned, there's probably about 200,000 people around there who have learned about discussing peacefully and constructively, regardless of where we come from. What is the potential of the alumni network? What should we aim to achieve with the alumni network?
I'll link it with another question that was asked. Mike asked if there's something that we regret having done or not having done in the past. And back then, we were thinking about exactly the same question that you just asked, Maria. How can we involve alumni and how can we use them? So we came up with this idea: oh, we should have an alumni platform, a digital alumni platform. So we talk about 2005 maybe, and we invested a lot of money to have something programmed. And during that period, I got an email from some American guys who said they had come up with something for alumni from universities, and if we wanted to partner with them. And I thought, no, that's something stupid. We build our own thing, and this is much better. So we built our own thing, and it never really worked. And yes, exactly, it was Facebook. It was Facebook. Yeah.
Not like Facebook, but actually Facebook.
Like Facebook, yeah. It
Wow.
was not like Facebook, it was the Facebook, yeah. When I realized that, it was very hard for me. Yeah, it's the first time I speak about it now. Yeah.
I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah, yeah. I had to share that story. I don't know how I sleep at night, Jochen. I don't know. I got over it now.
And with all the different platforms that we have now to engage and communicate, Zoom and Facebook and everything, what do you think we could do with the alumni network?
Yeah, I ran out of ideas. Honestly, I think it's good to. I think we should be good at keeping in touch with the alumni. And I think they are not the alumni. I think there are very different groups within the alumni. Some who would like to be active, as we just discussed, as in more political senses, think tanks, whatever. Others who would like to organize stuff. Others who would like to give back. Others who would like to mentor people, whatever. So trying to find out the differences in this huge group and making offers to this group to be involved. And luckily, you are now. And we are now at Facebook, and we can use it for
Yes.
that platform is much better than the one we had programmed back then.
What do you think, Bettina?
Well, I think, keeping in touch with the alumni is very good, and it's essential to keep this whole organization together in a way, because as you say on your website, give something back to EYP, and that's the alumni who can do that once they are professionally active. And when you look at big schools and universities, they all have alumni associations, and they give different jobs and different responsibilities to alumni. And you can count on them because they've had such a good time that they want to do something to help the organization in whatever position or quality you find that for them. I think this should happen. You just have to remember that we didn't have the internet back 34 years ago, and many records of alumni have got lost because there were only paper records there, and they've moved around and files have gone, and that's a pity. But when I look on Facebook and I look at some of the EYP friends I have and look at their other friends, I see a whole page of friends, and they're all from EYP, not a single other one. And I just can't get over it. How is this possible? Anyway, it makes me very happy.
I think that also I agree with Bettina what she says. It's a huge potential, and I think it's untapped potential. We have the ideas of the alumni network, they were there forever, but I think in the formal way it was established 3 years ago when it was ongoing activities happening that also Sol introduced in the beginning. And of course, I think we are a very mature organization now, almost 35 years old, with thousands of alumni all over the world, and almost all of us are we are like-minded people. So we went through the same process. It's like a school graduate. So even if you don't know someone, we would always be connected through the fact that we participated in this program. So we commit and we share the same values, and I think this is a massive force which is not activated. So in that sense, we can be ambassadors for active citizenship. We can really create impact in our local communities, and I think that's where I see alumni network go to, that really we have us more united in this idea. And of course for EYP, like almost everyone now in the chat writes that we have to give more young people opportunity to participate, and that of course is the most difficult step for us to make because it's not as straightforward. We have to engage and see, and for that we need resources, of course, time and money and knowledge. And that's also where the alumni could help us. Many of you in the research experts have a foot in the organization which could make an introduction to on the national level, international level, and we need to activate all of us so that we all work towards this aim to have accessible and diverse Europe and to give every young European a chance to be part of EYP.
Can I add something on a question that's actually flowing around? we tried very hard at different sessions to include disabled students who were either in wheelchairs or had other health problems, but the requirements for these students were such that the national committee organizers could not always cope with that, and to have and some needed a person to come with them to look after them during the daytime and be with them at night. And that really created an enormous logistical problem. So we sadly we had to abandon that idea, but that was quite a few years ago. So why don't you try again?
We've definitely had in the last years with the moves for outreach and inclusivity. We now have, for example, a guide developed by a group of EYPers from different countries on how to make events accessible. So it's a guide for organizer, what to look for, what to make sure they have, and so forth. And definitely more that can be done. But it's great that there's progress and initiatives. We're 10 minutes over time. Thank you for everyone's patience a bit more. It's so interesting. I'm sure we could go on much longer. Thank you very much, Bettina, Philip, and Anya, for joining us and for sharing your input. It was very interesting to hear and very exciting to take part in this. And thank you also to everyone who tuned in. We had almost 80 people here. Many thanks again to everyone. Quick round of applause for our panelists. We can unmute so that it can be.
Thank you, Maria.